Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Invincible Episode 6. So, the thing that I like about this episode most is the fact that we have a Frankenstein monster thing going on in this show. We also have it to where we have a real issue between Amber and Mark, and it almost goes into tier territory, and it's very compelling, and it really is like to the point of Amber and Mark really having to cement this relationship or not. And we have it, interestingly enough, like things are really starting to build with these two characters to the point of like it gets really, really interesting. We also have it to where it seems that uh, Omni Man's wife is just like you're just really interested to see like what exactly she is doing. You're fascinated to just see what she's gonna come up with next, because she is taking the mantle of the demon detective and is pulling at some strings to try and find answers. Uh, Interestingly enough, we have Deborah ending up to go to Omni Man's tailor to start to ask questions, and I thought that was like, man, like pins and needles, and just the like, oh my god, what's gonna happen next? Is someone going to end up dead? Is someone going to is there going to be a secret revealed? Is there something more with this tailor? We'll find out in this episode. But yeah, I really thought that this episode, like, there is, like, a lot of people could say it's like, oh, well, the villain in this episode was just like a nothing villain. But that didn't really matter because there was a good amount of story to equal a villain that might not have caught everyone's attention or might not have felt like the villain was like in this episode. To me, like, I thought everything was great. There was not a point where I was just like, well, like, there are real, true, legitimate high points and low points and whatever with this episode. Like, to me, there's just a straight, even keel thing going on here where that continues to happen every single episode. There's not a down point, there's not a offbeat, there's not a whatever. And so, with that said, there isn't much to really say about this episode without going into spoilers. Like, I would love to be able to have like come up with some kind of like, yeah, uh, like there isn't much to talk about in a spoiler like way because we have it to where recently everything is like kind of covered in the spoilers. There isn't there like we introduce a character that seems to be friends with Mark, and it seems like this character has a lot going on within this episode. I don't know actually Mark's friend's name, so I think I'm just gonna call him Mark's new friend or whatever, or Mark's just friend. Um, because I don't know, I'm not very familiar with who this guy even is. But anyways, and with that said, more than likely he might just be in this episode, and then you may or may not hear of anything of him again. I don't know. But anyways, going on into this, I think I've kind of stretched out the cryptic thing as long as humanly possible, because yeah, there's not much I can really decipher or figure out within a very much cryptic sense of this show. So let's go into that double five time to go into spoilers, and at the end of the day, we could say it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this episode. So going on into here, we end up having it to where Amber is to decide to go to college. And so she's like, well, hey, me and me and Mark's friend are gonna go out to check out this new college, and Mark is like, well, hey, like, how about I tag along? To where eventually Mark is even like, well, I think I could probably see this as a nice, neat little place, and like it would just be like my home away from home. And at one point, Amber is even like, well, like you need to get your grades up to even be able to like look at a place like this. And so Mark is like, oh yeah, like it seems like for Mark or Invincible in this story, like every single thing has to come extremely easy for him. That he thinks that, oh, since he's a superhero now, like the world will just open up for him and give him everything. And it doesn't work that way. Uh, like, Invincible is not going to all of a sudden, like, get $1 million and then have straight A's in school and like that's just the cockiness of this guy that he thinks that he doesn't need to go to school, but he'll be able to just ace everything anyways. It's just an odd approach. So we go on and to have um, Mark with his friend uh, who is seemingly attracted to other men, and so it seems that we have Mark's friend who eventually gets a guy that is some kind of athlete of sorts, and so we end up finding out in the very beginning of this film that we have some person who is seemingly taking and finding jocks and track stars and all kinds of athletes that are in this college and is changing them and making them into Reanimen. Uh, like basically making them drones for his own for the villainous own uh, thing to be able to use. So we end up having the Reanimen or one man, a Reaniman, going out and starting to cause ruckus, starting to cause havoc, and we end up having Amber scrambling to go and find some civilians and like run them off to get them away from the Reaniman. And we have Mark who is also doing the exact same thing, and or what is to seem to be doing the same thing, but he runs off to eventually to become invincible so he can go and tackle this Reaniman. So we end up, while this whole fight is to go on between Invincible and this Reaniman, we end up having Invincible like doing this test of strength between him and this villainous character, and we have it to where Mark's friend is right in the middle of these two, and he's like, Mark, and he's uh, like yeah, like I'll like we'll talk about this later, and so because we have it to where reasonably Mark's best friend can easily tell that it's Mark, and so uh, funny enough how like Superman, like when he puts on the super suit, like people don't know who he is, but like for Invincible, it's much different, I guess, because you can actually see who he is. Plus, his hairstyle isn't exactly different either, or drastically different than who he is in as Invincible, but it's so facto. So we go on here and eventually have it to where Invincible takes this like helmet part of the Reaniman off, and we eventually have the Reaniman eventually looking at himself in the water and remembering who he is and like remembering like what all he has done to himself, and that leads to him eventually running off. So we have Invincible after this moment is over. He ends up running off to change back into being Mark. And we end up having Mark running back to Amber and friends, mentioning, like, well, hey, like, I ran off to call the police. Like, I went and, like, I was trying to help. And Amber's like, no, like, you didn't do anything really to help. If anything, you just ran off. You ran from us. And, like, that is an awful thing to do. So, now that we have that set up, let's go and talk about some other characters that are going on with this episode that have a story. We have Adam and Eve, who is consistently like wanting to do her own thing, wanting to be a superhero her own way. And we end up having, of course, her having this back and forth uh, like argument with her parents, how reasonably, like, it gets to the point to where her parents basically say the worst thing that could have ever happened to you was get these superpowers. I'm like, is it really that terrible? I'm like, it's not like she's joined the Avengers and now has to like save the world every single day. Like, she's like cut herself off from that. She's like, you can have a point to where Adam Eve could just quit being a superhero altogether, and really, like, where is the problem there? Where is the fire, so to speak? Like, I don't get why her parents are so absurdly overprotective that any little thing that Adam Eve does, they're just like, oh no, you can't do that and you shouldn't do that, and like, they like want to micromanage Adam Eve's life, and she's the superhero in this scenario. It's, and plus also, they haven't come into powers of their own, and so really they uh like, it kind of gets to the point to where, like, they don't know what it's like to have powers, and so they're just saying like, well, like, since I don't know how to control my daughter, then uh like, yeah, so it is what it is with this story. We end up having Adam and Eve flying off to eventually create her own wooden homed treehouse thing somewhere off in the boondocks somewhere. And we eventually have it to where Adam Eve goes to talk to Mark about what she's doing and stuff along those lines. We have Mark, who ends up hugging Adam and Eve to like thank her for like trying to help out with Amber. And like, there's this whole thing where I'm like, so wait a minute, are we gonna get to the point to where Invincible is probably gonna go like, well, since Amber is a lost cause, quite possibly within this episode, well, Adam and Eve has always been good to me, and plus also, like, after this moment here, maybe Invincible maybe wants to strike out on his own to try to do certain crimes instead of actually being like, oh, I need to save the world every day because, good God, like every single episode, he's basically somehow or another having to basically save the world. These big, huge Goliath or behemoth like fight outs that he's been doing. And so I'm wondering if at some point he's going to slow down at some point to do what he's been wanting to do. So, pushing on. So, we go along here, and we end up having uh, we end up finding, when the kids are going into classes to check on things, we end up bumping into a guy named D.A. Sinclair, and we end up finding out that this guy is a genius, and that this guy just thinks so highly of himself because he's like, well, hey, I'm smarter than anybody in this school. And so we end up having it to where this guy, I think a lot of the times, doesn't need to learn anything. He can just test out of everything and then get his uh, uh, what is it? Whatever they get in school, the diplomas. Yeah, there we go. He can just easily get his diplomas without actually going into classes, because he just thinks it's a waste of time because he's already severely intelligent. So that is to set us up to basically showcase who the villain is in this episode, because we end up finding D.A. Sinclair uh, trying to retrieve jocks and athletes to go and do severe surgery on them to create them into being Reanimen. So while that is going on, we have Robot. Uh, and no, I completely skipped about the whole like beginning of this show, because reasonably, the whole beginning of this show was Black Samson, Monster Girl, and Invincible all going into the hospital, and like doctor procedures and stuff like that to help those people out. I think Robot was trying to figure out how to uh, trigger, excuse me, trigger Monster Girl's healing factor, and so they had to try to figure how to do that out. Uh, Black Samson, they had to try to like paddle him awake, meaning they had to give him electrical shocks or whatever, like to paddle him or whatever to get him to wake up, like using the whatever they're called, what the electroshock things. You understand what I mean, right? So we eventually have it to where Invincible ends up quite easily being able to uh, make a recovery with bruises all over his face, where Black Samson and Monster Girl are kind of on the fence right now. So we end up having Invincible going to Amber and basically asking for him and Amber to be able to start over, because reasonably we get to a point uh, where Mark has messed up way too often that he's like, well, could we just start over? To where eventually Amber goes and like pretends to call Mark, and Mark pretends to call Amber, and then they end up kissing again. And then it's like, oh, well, hey, I'm going to go to college. And so that's when Mark goes along with Amber to go to college. So we end up finding that the reanimators, or the reanimen, I mean, uh, they end up going and grabbing Mark's friend, and that's when eventually Invincible is going after the Reanimen and saying like, okay, well, enough is enough. I'm gonna punch my way through these people. Like, I'm gonna save my friend, and so on and so forth. We have it to where within this episode we had Mark's friend eventually, when they had alone time with one another for seconds, we had it to where Mark's friend is like, oh my god, you're invincible? Like, why didn't you tell me, kind of thing. Like, it's kind of like the whole Green Lantern thing where the best friend finds out that Green Lantern is Green Lantern, and they're like, oh, hey, how cool is that? And so we end up having again, Mark's friend ends up getting taken by the reanimators. Mark goes and tracks his friend down, and that also helps us find out that D.A. Sinclair is part of this whole operation. And so we have a simple takedown with Invincible, because basically we end up finding out that seemingly the back of these guys' heads has something that could be pulled out of the back of their heads to give them back their control, give them back their ability to uh, not do everything that DA Sinclair says. And so once they eventually find that out, because I think Invincible is just kind of like pulling at whatever, we eventually find out that once they figure out the thing of that, then they just sort of like, dude, pull all of them out, pull all those pieces out of that character, like do them now. So we end up having all those things pulled out, and so everybody seems to be back to normal, and so we have Invincible just punching out Sinclair, and so we end up having it to where eventually Invincible is giving a little yellow to, of course, Stedman or Cecil, and saying like, "Hey, this is what happened. Like these guys are all like robotic things now. Like, hey, how about you fix them? Wouldn't that be great?" So we have it to where at some point in this episode we have to kind of cover a little bit here and there of the Omni-Man stuff, because that's also a really cool thing. So we end up having at some point that Omni-Man's wife is to go and, like, it's in her head about the costume that Omni-Man was just pressing so hard about wanting to get his costume back. So we have Deborah, I think, going in and getting Omni-Man's costume and sending it to Omni-Man's tailor to do a diagnostic about every little scratch and every little scrape. And so we have Omni-Man's tailor going in, and he's like, whoa, like, this is all the stuff that I found, like, all of this stuff. We have Omni-Man seemingly being attacked by the Guardians of the Globe, like, every single stitch of whatever is evidence of that. And so we end up having it to where Omni-Man, Omni-Man's tailor is just kind of convinced that it's like, well, there's got to be some reason for this. Maybe they lost control, or maybe he did. Who knows? Like, there is, I guess, there isn't any footage to cover of any of this stuff to see what the heck had happened. So we eventually have it to where Omni-Man is kind of suspicious, and so we end up having Omni-Man checking his bag to realize that there had just been some, like, replacement of clothes. And so Omni-Man goes and is tracking down Deborah to realize that she had gone to his tailor. And so we end up having Omni-Man bringing in beers to the tailor to say, like, hey, like, it's been a while, huh? And so we have the tailor, who is like shaking in his boots, talking to Omni-Man, and we have Omni-Man bringing up in some past that the tailor had been ticked off by some guy, and so the tailor had made some kind of plaid outfit for this superhero to wear. And so we have it to where the tailor is like, well, yeah, like, that's what happens when you tick off your tailor. And so we end up having it to where Omni-Man is like, well, yeah, that's the main reason why I brought beers over to you, because it's like, don't tick off the tailor. And the tailor's like, yeah. It's like, so at some point we do not have Omni-Man like questioning anything going along with the tailor. It just kind of seems that Omni-Man is going to his tailor just to kind of see like how he acts, like how how if he's not going to spill the beans at any point or something along those lines, to just kind of see if the pen slips or something along that those things to just kind of see how uncomfortable he is. We also have it where Omni Man goes to Cecil and goes to uh, like check on like, hey, like what happened with the demon detective? Like, did you get any more information out of him? And Cecil was like, well, no, like we couldn't get any more information. Uh, we also have it to a robot is going to again the Mahler twins uh, to check on his specimen that he had given him, and I don't know. It seems that the robot is eventually going to, uh, I would assess, probably give them more uh, specimens eventually. I'm assessing or assuming that eventually, probably the robot is going to start just cloning all of the Guardians of the Globe just in case. Because I think that he wants to have his own specific Guardians of the Globe, is what I'm thinking. Or. He wants to clone a variation of himself, and that might be his grandmaster plan all along, is to work with the Mahler twins to just make one of himself. Make one of himself, but make it much more powerful. Get to the point where maybe like the powers of the entire team are maybe going to be infused in this one specimen, which I'm assessing and or assuming could be the robot boy or whatever you want to call it. So yeah. With that said, like speculation and stuff along those lines, yeah, I'm assessing or assuming that we're probably going to find out that the tailor was dead. Like, I'm just waiting for us to just see the tailor dead somewhere. Um, because if not, if the tailor is going to be absolutely fine, then we would also have to assess that Omni Man is not a villain. That he doesn't just kill defenseless people, or does he? There's a whole thing where you really like, was Omni-Man being a villain in the very first early episode? Was that a mistake? Was it on purpose? Uh, was he trying to get his son into the Guardians of the Globe? What exactly was Omni-Man's motivation? And I'm kind of interested to think what it could quite possibly be of killing all these people off. I'm kind of just fascinated of why he did it. If he legitimately did it, or maybe he was controlled by somebody and you did not realize that the whole time. Maybe you have Omni Man that is pulling off the Kurt Russell Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 thing, where you think he's a good guy, but in all actuality, like he maybe came to this planet to annihilate it, but maybe we'll realize that his planet had been destroyed, so he was just stuck, like just living in this planet. So I don't know, like it could be a number of different stories, and it would just be kind of fascinating to see where this story goes. So, with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. I really enjoy this show. Like, you're really on pins and needles to just get to that oh crap moment where we end up having Amber in tears and she's running off to have Mark opening a door to try to comfort Amber. We end up having Amber just kind of like putting her sheets a little bit closer to her body, and Mark just kind of is going to walk into a room, but then eventually walks off. Like, kind of showcasing, like, well, should Amber should Amber be like should Amber give Mark another chance because at least he was going to try to talk to her, and she knows that, and so yeah. With that said, yeah. So that's all I wanted to say in this review. A very interesting episode. I enjoy like a bit of the dark and gritty and whatever. Because within this episode we had like surgery being done on a person, and that was kind of crazy. Uh, and yeah, this is a very interesting episode. A very Frankensteinish like monster thing going on in here, and that's the thing I liked. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.